Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another video. Today I'm talking about this tree right here. It is a green Japanese maple. I don't know the exact variety. I planted it over 20 years ago in the early 2000s, and I believe it to be just a standard Japanese maple. I don't think there was a specific variety, but this tree has been growing in the same spot for many years and it's went through a lot of changes. But I get a lot of seedlings from this tree, and every time they do well. Some of the other varieties that I've tried in zone 7A where I'm at can be very easily damaged by the intense summer sun. We get some extreme days in summer, and one of the lace leaf maples I have right now is showing some damage. But anyways, what I'm talking about today is taking seeds from this tree, and I'm going to tell you all the do's and don'ts, the steps along the way, and what to look for and avoid to lose your seeds or seedlings before they even have a chance to germinate. So follow me to the greenhouse, and along the way I think we're going to stop and look at a few Japanese maples. But this has to be one of my favorites in the springtime because the leaves on it are just fluorescent green. When the light hits it in the evening, it's just incredible. But anyways, let's move on. Hey guys, so what I'm doing now is I'm up in the tree on my ladder, risking life and limb to get a handful of seeds. But that's what you have to do if you have a taller Japanese maple. You just want to go through collecting the seeds. You can cut them off, but they come off fairly easy just by plucking them by hand. But what I'm doing is I'm just searching for a certain percentage of seeds. I'm not going to take them all at one time. I'm going to take them over a period of the next 2 to 2.5 months. I want to make sure that I maximize the chance of these seeds being successful. So you always have a certain percentage of failure. So if you do this and you take all your seeds and you do it all at once and you have massive failure problems with mold or fungus growing in them, then that's going to be super disappointing because you've used all your seeds at one time. So remember to take it in stages throughout the fall months over a period of 2 to 3 months before your hard frost comes. Now this is a beautiful Japanese lace leaf maple, and it just means that the leaves are dissected. And you can see that I'll try to bring you in closer before we head away from this tree and move on to some of the other trees. But this is a dwarf tree. This is pretty much its maximum size. I rarely have to do any pruning, but it is another example of a beautiful Japanese maple. And this has been sitting here in this spot, growing here in this spot for close to 2 decades. Now here's a close-up of what the lace leaf is. It's a very, very fine leaf. It's not like the wider leaves you see on the green maple earlier in the video, but it is a beautiful tree nonetheless, and it's been very healthy and happy growing in this spot, and I've had to do minimal care to it, but it just comes back every year just a little bit better than the previous year. Now this tree I also planted when it was very small. It was probably 2 or 3 gallons at the time it was planted, but it is also a lace leaf maple, but it is not a dwarf. It has gotten quite large over the last 15 years, but it's really beautiful, and I'm going to collect some seeds from this tree as well over the next 2 to 3 months. So guys, this is another Japanese maple. It's just a standard green maple. It's been growing in this spot for over a decade, and so it seems to be very happy here. It's got a little bit of shade. It's actually how they grow in the forest of Japan. And the thing is if a Japanese maple gets too much sunlight, it's going to get sun scorch on it. It just does not like it, and especially the red blood goods, they will die. I've learned this from personal experience. It may take several years, but each year they will be in decline. So what I will tell you, if you're going to plant a blood good Japanese maple or a red Japanese maple, make sure it has a lot of shade, not complete shade. You want dappled sunlight, but the tree will eventually start having problems if it's in full sun. Now, if you're in a more northern climate above zone 7A where I'm at, you may not have this problem, but I definitely have it, and I've lost 2 or 3 trees because of the scorching sun. So just keep that in mind. It took me many years to figure out what was going on with these maples. I thought they could grow in full sun, but they cannot. Now, the green ones are more likely to be able to tolerate more sun, but the red ones can't. Now, the Japanese maple you're looking at here has been growing in this pot for many, many years. It's been very healthy and happy, but this year we had some extreme 100 plus, 105, 110 degree days, and I'm seeing some damage that was caused by the sun. So I made the mistake of trusting this spot would work. It is too hot. It's too hot for this spot, and it's too sunny. So next year, this will be in more of a shaded spot. I may lose 2 or 3 branches from this tree, but I do see some damage that's occurred. Now this Japanese maple is also a dwarf, and this is about as large as it's going to get. It is a lace leaf. You can see, I'm hoping you can see that in the video well, but it's been very happy here. It does get some afternoon sun, but then there's also a lot of morning shade and evening shade, so it's only a limited number of hours a day. But even so, I'm always worried that even though I planted it here and it's been doing well, I'm always concerned that at some point it may get too much sun. So that's always a precaution. Remember, you have to have a balance between sunlight and shade when it comes to Japanese maples. So guys, this is a Sango Kaku Japanese maple, and it is a Japanese red bark maple. Now right now the bark is not red, but when wintertime comes, this bark will be a coral or a reddish color, and it's very interesting. Once it's lost all of its leaves, that red really stands out in the garden. So it's one of the few things in winter that has a lot of color when everything else looks dead or dying. So guys, let's head out to the greenhouse and we'll take a look and do a step-by-step process of how to take your seeds and turn them into seedlings, so you will be able to start growing Japanese maples in large numbers. And I'll show you how you can avoid a lot of the mistakes and pitfalls that a lot of new Japanese seeds encounter. So guys, we're back in the greenhouse, and I want to show you what's possible when you collect Japanese maple seeds. These little seedlings right here are only 2 years old. They're ready to go into much larger pots. The secret of these growing so fast was they were sitting in this tray and they were on an automatic watering schedule each day. So they received just about 1 minute of water, overflowing some of the older water, and I did a cleaning probably every 2 to 3 weeks, so there wasn't a lot of algae growing in here. And also I put mosquito bits in here to stop the mosquitoes from multiplying as well. I think I talked about that in a previous video. But this is how fast these seedlings can grow just in a couple of years if they're given the right environment. And the environment for them that they really loved was the green Japanese maple. The environment for them was in this tray, providing them plenty of water. This is the green maple, the exact maple that I just showed you from the very beginning of the video. And you can see this tree is approaching 3 feet tall. Now this tree I wanted to bring into the greenhouse. It is a dwarf Japanese maple. The name of it is Sharp's Pygmy. I purchased it over a decade ago, probably close to 15 years ago. I had 2 of them, and sadly I made the mistake of letting one of them have too much sunlight. So this one grows pretty much in about 80 to 90% shade all day. It does quite well in the springtime. It's absolutely gorgeous. But this tree, I would guesstimate its age at around 25 to 30 years. I've had it for 15 years and it was almost the exact same size as it is now. It's grown a little bit, and the ramification of the branches have definitely split and put out new branches under the canopy. But this tree is a perfect example of a beautiful Japanese maple. It is actually fully grown, so this tree will not get much larger. If I didn't prune it, you might see shoots coming out of the top, but as far as keeping it in shape, it's very easy. It doesn't grow a lot, and this is a beautiful, beautiful Japanese maple. Now, I'm sorry I took the long road to get to the topic at hand, which is basically about taking your Japanese maple seeds and turning them into seedlings and ultimately get them to look like this, and one day possibly something like this. So let's get started. I'm going to go point by point through about 20 to 25 points and how-tos of exactly how to get these maple seeds to success with a minimal amount of loss by following specific guides along the way. Now, the first step in collecting the seeds is you're going to start observing the tree in late summer and early fall. You're going to start looking at the seedlings and you're going to start watching where they're forming. And then your next step will be to plan on taking those seeds. But you just want to start by looking at the tree and make sure it's producing seeds. Sometimes if there's a lot of stress on a tree, it may not produce seeds. So that's one thing you need to get up into the tree. If it's too tall, you'll need a ladder. But basically, you're just wanting to observe the tree and make sure that it is producing seeds, so you'll be able to plan ahead of exactly when to take those seeds. Now, the optimum time to take the seeds is when they start to change from green to either red or brown. As you can see, these seeds, I've got a red shirt, so it's going to be impossible to see, but these seeds have changed to a reddish, kind of a burgundy color. So these seeds are ready to be taken, but that's not 100% sure. So I'm taking them, as I said earlier in the video, in steps through the fall to make sure that I get a successful seed harvest. So I just want to make sure that I don't take them all at once and then have a catastrophic failure. Now, if you wait too long to take your seeds, you may have the seeds start dropping. And when that happens, there's a much bigger chance of birds coming in and taking the seeds or insects getting to the seeds. So you want to make sure you take them before they hit the ground. Once they hit the ground, the percentage of good seeds is going to drop dramatically. Now, there's some debate as to whether or not to remove the wings of the seed, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. The wings are what's off of each seed. You'll see it. Let's see if you can see that right there. The wings come off of each seed. You can either leave them on there or take them off. You can remove them with a pair of scissors and just cut them off. It's up to you whether or not you want to do that. I don't think it really makes a huge difference as to whether or not the seed will survive. So you can do it either way. Now, as you're looking through your seeds, you want to look for discoloration or damage to the seed. If an insect has went in and munched on some of it, you'll want to toss that seed away because all it's going to do is just rot in your seed bed. So just make sure you kind of do a careful inspection and make sure there's no damage, discolored, or insect damage on that seed that you'll need to toss out. Now, the next step is pre-soaking for 24 hours. And I don't know, this is off topic, I'm sorry, but I love these Japanese bowls. This is a very traditional design in Japan, and I found this in America. This was at a discount store, and it was brand new, but it has a beautiful design. So sorry, I'm off on my Japan topic again. So take your seeds, put them in the bowl, and you want lukewarm water. You want them to soak for 24 hours. The seeds at the end of that 24 hours, and you want it deeper than this so you can tell this next step. If they sink to the bottom, that means the seeds are good. If they're still floating on top, it may mean they're not ready yet or they were not viable seeds. So remember that. But you maybe want a large, I'm just using this container for design purposes. You may want something as large as a gallon-sized pitcher so you can see what sinks and what floats. That's the next step in taking your seeds to the seed bed, 24-hour soak. Now you want to make sure the water is lukewarm, not really hot. You want to be able to put your hand in it and not be scalded, but warm water is better than cold because you're trying to break through this outer shell of each seedling. So that's one thing to remember is you want to do that warm water. You might take 1 teaspoon per gallon of hydrogen peroxide, and that might help break down the outer core as well. But that's the whole purpose of doing that 24-hour soak is you're just trying to break down that outer shell. If you don't do this step, your seeds may not germinate the first year, but then if they may come out and germinate the second year. So it's a multi-year process sometimes. If the seeds don't feel like they're in the right environment, they won't germinate that first year. It might be the second year. I don't know about the third year, but I have read that sometimes they will wait to that second year. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is cold stratification, and that's just a fancy way of saying the cold time that a seed spends in, let's say, the outdoors or your refrigerator. I think it's a lot better to use your refrigerator because you have that steady temperature and you know you're not going to have a hot day. You're going to have a number of days where it's really cold. You might actually start by doing the first 24 hours in the freezer and then move it to the refrigerator. If you have like a wine cooler or a beer fridge that stays at a constant colder temperature than your fridge, that would be even better. But cold stratification would be the next step in your seedlings. Now I'm going to tell you how to put it in your refrigerator and in the bag and everything like that. But I just want to say, don't want to forget that part. Cold stratification has to take place in order for these seeds to come out. If you leave them on the counter, wait till springtime, and it's already warm, that will not work. They have to go through that cold period. Now there is some debate as to what to put in the bag with the seedlings. Some people say sphagnum moss, not the powdery kind, but the kind that's kind of a spongy, I forget what the name of it is, but it's more of a spongy peat moss. And so you can add that to the bag. It will help with moisture, but I just like to mist spray it in the bag. And also inside that misting water that I spray it with, I put 1 teaspoon of hydrogen peroxide per gallon and mist it in there. Again, we're trying to just break down that outer seed coat so we can have the maximum amount of germination in the percentage of seeds we have. Now, I'm going to link another video here somewhere about using aspirin in the garden, and that can also help your seedlings, but it's not absolutely necessary. It's just an idea that I like. So I'll link that up above so you can take a look at it as far as getting your seeds started. Now, as far as monitoring the bag in your fridge or wherever you have it, you want to look at it about once a week. Now, obviously, this would not be in the freezer. At this point, it would be back in your, like a beer cooler, wine cooler, or your regular refrigerator, and you're just going to want to watch it about once a week. Take a look and see if you see any roots forming on any of the seeds. If they are, those are early germinators, and you can carefully remove those from the rest of the seeds and move them onto your potting medium. Those are the early seed, the early root producing, and those are the ones you want to kind of separate so the rest of the seeds are not in the bag all putting out too many roots, if I can say that right. Now, as far as moisture in the bag, you want to make sure that it doesn't dry out, because if it does dry out and there's not enough moisture inside the bag, that's going to hinder germination. So you want to make sure there's moisture. If there's too much moisture in the bag, you might have mold or fungus growing in there. If that's the case, you're going to need to open it up and carefully let it air out and maybe hit it with a mist of the hydrogen peroxide solution in that video I talked about earlier. So, and I'll link that as well right here. But anyways, that's one thing you have to carefully monitor moisture in this bag. Not too much, not too little. Now, one thing to remember about seeds is that, and I mentioned this earlier, but I just want to make this a very clear point. Sometimes the seeds may not germinate that first year. So don't look at it as a failure. put your seeds aside, put them outside in the shade, and just keep them moist, because these seeds may still germinate the second year. It's a multi-year process in some seeds with some species or some varieties of Japanese maple. Now, there's a few different potting mediums you can use, and I'm going to probably use all three of these because I want to experiment. I always like experimenting and seeing what works best. I know in the past I've just used a standard potting soil, and that worked okay, but there was probably a little bit larger than normal failure percentage. So this year I'm going to use a seed starting mix in one set. I'm going to use vermiculite mixed with peat moss, and also I'm going to use perlite mixed with peat moss. So I'm going to do all three of those mediums and monitor them carefully. In some trays, I'll have all three of those mediums in the same tray, just in different cells. So what I want to do is I want to find out which one works best for me and my circumstances. There's always those little variables that are happening, the number of days you get to monitor, your watering schedule, when you're able to care after your seeds. So just remember that using just one type of potting medium may not be the best way. Try different potting mediums and see which one provides you the most success. Now, whatever potting medium you decide to use out of the three that I mentioned, you want to make sure that it's very airy and very light. You want those tiny, tiny roots to be able to get through the medium as easily as possible. Never ever use garden soil. And like I said earlier, I've made the mistake of using standard potting soil before, but it's best to use a seed starting mix or the other two that I mentioned, so that soil can give it the best chance. And another thing is that the medium is sterile. That can be another important thing and can reduce the number of die-offs and plant failure due to disease or other issues. Now, once you're ready to take your seeds and put them into a larger container out of the bags, you're going to want to make sure that you don't plant them too deep. Too deep and they may struggle to emerge from the soil. And too deep would be anything over probably an inch in deep. Even that's a little bit on the deep side. I'd just say half an inch to a quarter of an inch, because you're going to put a dusting of very, very light peat moss or some other type of potting medium, the potting soil that's for seed, specifically for seed starting. So just remember, not too deep in here. You don't want them at the bottom of the tray. Another thing is you don't want them crowding each other. You kind of want them spread out so they're not competing for nutrients and they have plenty of room to grow and send out those shoots. Now, initially, light isn't that critical until your seedlings emerge. Then it does become critical. So you want to make sure that when it's underground and there's nothing coming up yet, you don't see any flowering or your initial set of leaves, don't worry so much about lighting. But once that happens, lighting becomes critical. So I would recommend using, if you're keeping them inside for a while and you haven't hit those days where you can take it outside, use a grow light. I'll link one of those as well. And that is a very important thing. Also, depending on where your grow light is situated, rotating your tray will help even growth, so it will not grow to one side or the other. And that's really important, is lighting is critical at that stage. Now, once your seedlings have emerged, you want to do regular monitoring. You want to make sure that the soil is not too moist, not waterlogged, just evenly moist through. You can use a moisture meter to tell you that. I've got one around here somewhere that I always link in the description. I wish I knew where it was at. I seem to have misplaced it. But anyways, you want to make sure the water is evenly moist. Now, I said just a moment ago, once they emerge, they're in a photosynthetic phase and they're going to need more light than normal. So that's the early stages. Now, I'm not talking about sunlight. I'm just talking about that grow light. You don't want it right on top of them, but you want them to know that there's light there and the seed can start continuing to grow, and make sure that it doesn't die off. Now remember, if you do put it in a window that has too much light, that can cause legginess and cause the seedling to fall over. So remember, you don't want intense light, just a nice, even, balanced light. If you have it only growing in a windowsill, you want it to be in filtered sunlight or filtered shade where there's not intense light coming into that window. Now, as far as feeding goes, you want to do that very sparingly. Make a very weak solution of whatever fertilizer you're using, because the new seedlings can burn easily. So remember, very light on the fertilizer in the initial stages there. It's okay to do it, but maybe a mist bottle. I've got a mister I'll show you that I use all the time. But that's the thing, easy on the fertilizer in the beginning, because they're very, very weak and very easily burned by too much nutrients. Now, overwatering of your seedlings can cause damping off, and that can cause the seedling to die or to just not succeed the way it would. Now these, I did not put them in full water all the time until they'd had a chance to get about 6 or 8 inches long, and then I put them in this tray, but the water was constantly spraying on it once a day. So remember, too much water can cause that issue. Another thing to remember is if you have this in a basement or garage, you might want to put a fan on a timer so you can have some air circulation, because you don't want there to be no air. It could cause fungal infections from stagnant air. So just remember, A fan on a timer will make a big difference in the legginess and the strength of your seedling. Just hitting it once or twice a day, maybe for 15 minutes, not direct air though. You want it kind of indirect, so kind of pointed away where the air kind of flows off a wall or something else, so you're not drying the seedlings out. But remember, a fan on a timer is something that will help you succeed as well. Now, once your seedling has developed its first 2 actual leaves, not the first leaves that come out, but the actual leaves that are you see on the regular plant, the first 2 leaves are not what you're looking for. You're looking for that second set of leaves, which is the actual true leaves. They'll be ready to go into a pot and ready to go onto the next stage. Now, when you're handling your new seedlings, you want to make sure that you pick them up by the leaves, not the stem, because the stem can be easily damaged. So when you go to put them in your pot, hold by the leaves and then put it into your medium. So that's something really important to remember, is that stem can be very easily damaged from your finger, just a small amount of pressure. Now, hardening off is the process where you're taking your seedlings from your garage, basement, or greenhouse into the environment outside. You want to do that for a limited amount of time, possibly 1 hour to 2 hours a day, and you just gradually increase that over a week so that it can become acclimated to the more sunlight, more wind, and stronger temperature changes. As I'd said before, Japanese maples can actually become sunburned, so you don't want them in full sun. You want them in a nice shady spot with very, very limited sunlight, filtered sunlight, just to make sure they don't get sunburned. Now, as you can see, these seedlings are quite big after just a couple of seasons, and they are ready to go into a much larger pot or into the ground. Just remember, when you do plant these, Japanese maples tend to prefer filtered sunlight, and I've made that mistake on 3 or 4 beautiful trees that I've paid a lot of money for, and it's more likely to happen on the red maples than the green maples, but even so, they grow naturally in their environment in Japan in the shade. So remember, dappled sunlight, or at least not full all-day sun, is a key. Now, whether in a grow bag, planting pot, container, whatever it is, or directly in the ground, you want to make sure that soil is very organically rich, and you want to use something like black cow composted manure mixed with your favorite potting mix. I have a potting mix that I do myself that's a premium potting mix, and it saves me up to 75% off the cost of store-bought potting mix, if I can say that. So I'll link that video as well. But that's what you want to do, is you want it to be mixed with really organic material and really good potting mix that drains well. That's the key, drains well. Japanese maples do not like to stand in water, so that's another important thing. Remember, drain it. You don't want to plant it in a low area of the yard that gets too much moisture. You want there to be I can't say this enough, well draining area. Now, remember to water initially the first few weeks, at least 2 or 3 times a week, because you want that root system to get established. You don't want to do that consistently on, but in the beginning, you want to water 2 or 3 times a week for the first few weeks. And speaking about watering and moisture, I always talk about this. If you have an irrigation system, and if this is just an overspray system, I always recommend switching it over to a micro irrigation system. You can put these right at the base of each plant, and it will water 1 minute a day up to a large number of minutes, but you don't need but about 1 minute a day on these initial seedlings that are going into the ground. And this really will save your plants a lot of trouble. It's very flexible. The hose is great. I can link all the material to put this together, but I got rid of my overspray system in the garden and many other areas, as well as my bonsai. I like the micro irrigation because I know the water is going right to the root. There's no overspray on the top of the plants, and there's no chance of diseases. And it also limits other pests and insects that might attack because there's so much water during the day. Now, if you put this tray outside without a lid on it, without a secured lid, there's a chance that birds or other pests might get in here and go through the seeds and just totally destroy your seed bed. So remember, if this goes outside, it needs a secured lid on top. You can put small holes in it. I've got an example of that around here somewhere. But just remember, no direct sunlight. It will turn into, instead of a mini greenhouse, it will turn into a mini oven. Now, this is kind of sad, but you put a lot of work into your seeds, but you have to remember that not all seeds, even though they germinate, they may send out a set of leaves, you have to remember that not all of them will survive. There's a certain percentage that are going to die no matter what you do. So just remember, focus on the ones that have succeeded and are prospering and growing well. That's what you want to put your energy into, and not overthink why do the others die. You'll just have to accept that as part of the growing process. Another thing to remember about Japanese maples is they are relatively slow growers, especially as seedlings and small saplings. So they're going to grow really slow. I think these are about to go into their 3rd year. They're about 2 years old or 2 seasons old. So that's one thing to remember. don't become impatient. Just realize that these are not going to be a fast growing tree, but once they do establish themselves, they will speed up their growth process. Now, another thing to remember, and I don't have any handy here, but I purchased some aluminum and also some copper tags that I can tie to the base of each limb, the bottom of the limbs. You don't want to tie it around the base of the trunk because it will cut into the trunk. But these are specifically for the purpose, years and years later, trying to remember what type of tree you planted or what exact variety. So those little tags will last forever. Now you can write on the ones that a special ink comes with, but that will eventually wash off, and also those become brittle and they break very easily. So the aluminum and copper tags are your best bet. That's the best way to go, because I've seen those years later at old nurseries, and the copper tag and the aluminum tag are still very readable. I'll link that as well in the description. Now, Japanese maples handle cold really well. Japan itself can be a very cold country, and these come from a really cold winter climate, so you don't have to worry so much about it. But if your temperatures are extreme, then you might want to consider extreme mulching, maybe 6 inches of mulch around above the root system, and actually go beyond that and put a frost blanket over it or some type of container in its early years. As it gets older, it may not need that protection, but in the early years as a sapling, you may want to consider doing that. Now, even in the wintertime, you don't think about watering so much because you think the tree is dormant, but a tree can be dried out quite a bit from cold winter air and strong winds. So you might want to, on a warmer day, just go out and give it just a light misting, not a freezing day and not a day that's going to freeze that night, but just give it a misting with your hose-in sprayer and just mist the root system or water the root system and mist the rest of the tree, just to keep that bark from drying out. Sometimes you'll have it limbed off and you won't know why. It could have been from the previous winter, was too cold. That limb may have dried out over the winter, and that may be exactly why you lost the limb. Now, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of varieties of Japanese maples, and there are always probably going to be new ones being added from breeding and crossbreeding. And I think the most interesting one I ever saw was on vacation, and there's a type of Japanese maple in the springtime. It is a purple color, excuse me. It's a purple color, a deep purple, and it's called Purple Ghost. And I've only seen one in person, and it was at a resort I stayed at many years ago, maybe 15 years ago. I found that extremely interesting. I would love to have one, but I just haven't been able to come across one in a garden center or the seeds themselves. So that's an interesting thing to consider. Another note on varieties is you might research the variety you're wanting to plant in your zone and make sure that it's compatible with your zone and your winters and summers. Florida, I don't think Japanese maples will survive there very well, especially in the southern part of Florida. It's just too hot in the summer and the sun is too intense. Maybe extreme northern Florida, the Panhandle, and I'm not sure about California. I've never read up, but all my trips to Florida, I've never seen a Japanese maple growing anywhere. Now, maybe they do grow there. Maybe extreme Tallahassee in that area, maybe they do. But the summer sun in Florida is extreme, especially July and August. Now, the last part of the video, I'm going to give you a 10-point rundown, 10 rapid fire of the 10 mistakes, the biggest mistakes people make when taking seeds from Japanese maples. So let me shoot through those really quickly. The first one is taking the seeds either too soon or too late. That can reduce the germination rate success. So remember, you want to do it when they've changed color and they're ready to be taken. If you do it too late, they may have already hit the ground and insects may have gotten into them, or birds may have decimated the entire seed collection you were planning on taking. Too early, if they're still green, of course, they're not going to germinate as well, and your germination rate may be only 1 or 2%. Now, there's a little bit of a debate on whether or not this needs to take place, but these little wings you see, I don't know if you can see that too easy because of my red shirt, but the little wings you see are called samaras or samaras. I'm not sure of the exact pronunciation, but a lot of people say you need to remove that wing area. You can do that pretty easy with a pair of scissors. It does add a little bit more work to your seed collecting process and your seed starting, but that's one thing they say to do, is to take those off, and in the process, it just makes it a little bit easier. But like I said in the first few lines of this sentence, it's not absolutely necessary. I did it without them many times, so it's not an absolute necessity. Now, the next mistake people often make is not pre-soaking the seeds for 24 hours and starting those seeds out in lukewarm to warm water. That's what you want to do to break down that outer seed husk, the shell that allows the whole process to start. That's what might delay your seed from starting until the second year, until the seed starts to break down naturally. So remember, that's really important, is the 24 hours of soaking. The next big mistake people often make is going directly into their potting mix without cold stratification. That refrigeration time, or that cold time for the seeds, is absolutely necessary. If you go out into the areas of Japan where the trees grow, there can be many, many months of cold weather. So that's one thing you want to remember. You're going to need to take these in the fall, keep them cold until the spring or early spring or late winter, so you can do what naturally happens in the wintertime. Now, another big mistake people often make in the cold stratification process is too much moisture in the bag. You might want to put a couple of paper towels in there so you can kind of even out the moisture, and just lightly mist spray it with your misting bottle. Remember, they don't want to be standing in a lot of water during this process, so just keep a minimal amount of moisture in there, but of course don't let them dry out either. Now, planting depth can be another big mistake people make. They can plant the seeds too deep. Now, I've read that you're supposed to plant the seed 1 to 2 times its current width. So you can see that we're only talking about a couple of millimeters. So 1/4 of an inch would be deep enough to plant one of these. 1 to 2 inches would be too deep. So basically you're just setting them on top of the soil and bringing in a light dusting, maybe 1 to 2 millimeters, maybe 3 millimeters, or if I can say this the other way, 1/4 of an inch of soil maximum. Another thing that can cause failure of your seedlings is using a non-sterile potting mix or seed starting mix. That's what you want to use, is one that is sterile. You don't want to use just typical garden soil or typical potting soil. Something that's sterile, you're going to have a much better chance of success with those seedlings. Another critical thing is light. Now, once your seedlings have erupted out of the soil, you're going to want to make sure they have ample light. Not direct sunlight, but if they don't have enough light, they can become leggy and weak. So that's what you want to remember. There's a careful balance there. A grow light situated a good foot or more above it, just so that the seedling can start that process of receiving the light to grow. Another reason your seedlings will fail is inadequate heat. So you want to remember, get yourself a heating mat or make sure that they're in a warm environment. If they're inside your house, that's fine. It should be the right temperature. But that heating mat in a garage or an unheated greenhouse is going to be critical to get those seedlings started right. Now, overwatering is a very common reason seedlings fail. If you overwater, you're going to have the condition of damping off, which is a problem with overwatering and causes a fungal issue in the plant. So make sure you're not overwatering. Very light, soil moist, but not saturated, and definitely not soggy. Another reason your seedlings might fail is they never had that chance to harden off. You've taken them outside directly from their seeding tray and just put them outside and transplanted them. That is a critical error. You want to make sure you do that week-long process where you take them in and out and allow them to build up strength and get used to those temperature swings and the sunlight difference. Of course, you don't want to put your seedlings in direct sunlight, but they just need to get used to that new environment. Remember, if you're in a southern area where you have a lot more sunlight in the summertime, you don't want to make the mistake of getting through the entire process, getting your seedlings growing and having everything working great, and then you plant it out in the garden in a full sunlight area. Japanese maple may survive for many years like that, but then suddenly it will start to go into decline each year. As the summer hits, you'll notice you'll have a limb die here and a limb die there. Sadly, I had that happen to 2 or 3 beautiful trees, but I just didn't realize that I'd planted them in the wrong area. So having a daytime light meter, there's a meter, I have it somewhere in the greenhouse, but it is a meter where you can put in the ground. It will measure from sun up to sundown how many hours a day that particular spot gets sunlight. So you can purchase one of those. I'll put that in the description as well. And that will tell you, is this area getting too much sunlight? Now, also you have to remember, sunlight in the summer can be completely different in the winter. The sun in the summer is further in the southern sky, which would be this way of the greenhouse for me, or north. So if it's a northern area of your yard, you can probably safely do it as long as you're monitoring how many hours a day that exact spot gets sunlight. Everybody has a specific area they want to plant the Japanese maple in their yard, but it just may not be suited because of too much sunlight. Another thing that can cause failure of your sapling or your seedling once it gets into the ground is improper soil. Our soil here is extremely clay. I heard a master gardener say many years ago that it really doesn't matter. You can use the soil in your yard, but I just think that's an absolutely terrible piece of advice. I think you need really rich soil. So that's one thing to remember, is add something like black cow to the soil and really build up the moisture, the quality, the nutrient level of the soil as you go to plant. And you may have to add a very large bag, because as this tree grows, it's going to spread out its roots and it's going to need more and more nutrient, and it's going to want that well-draining soil. Now, another thing to remember is seedlings are very susceptible to over-fertilization. So you want to do very light fertilizing and be gentle in the beginning. Even in the ground, you don't want to put a strong fertilizer down. Just weaken it. Maybe cut in half or by 3/4 the amount that's recommended on the box so you can keep that from burning your plant. Now, the other thing to remember is aphids and other insects like to attack seedlings. So remember, I've got a video about natural pest control that involves this, neem oil, and diatomaceous earth. I'll link that video as well. Neem oil is great to put in your sprayer because you just give it a light dusting in the morning or late evening, and that will protect your seedlings from the many varieties of insects, especially the ones that we have here. Now, once your trees are in the ground, again, I've already talked about this before, but I just want to make this point clear. Failing to mulch can cause a problem with the saplings and their growth. So you want to mulch around the tree, but don't go closer than 1 inch to the base of the tree. You don't want any rot happening there. As the mulch decomposes, you might have rot starting in the base of your tree. Also, planting, another thing about planting is planting them too close together. You have to remember, depending on the size of the tree, because this tree is never going to get bigger than this, but the tree you saw in the front is quite a bit larger than this. So you don't want to plant these too close together. If you want a row of Japanese maples, that's probably not going to work. A Japanese maple is more of a specimen plant that you want everyone to look at and be wowed by it, especially in the spring and the fall. Also, you're going to want to make sure that the variety you're wanting to plant is going to work in your zone. You want to do a specific online search for the Japanese maple variety you're planting and make sure it's compatible with your zone. That can lead to failure months or years after you planted it, and you won't really understand why, as I did. I made that terrible mistake once. Now, I just want to talk just for the last part about zones and where's the best places to grow Japanese maple. It's considered that zones 5 through 8 are the best zones for Japanese maples. Zone 6 is considered one of the most comfortable zones for Japanese maples. Zone 7 can be great as well, and Zone 7 can demonstrate the beautiful colors in fall and spring of a Japanese maple. But also, you have to remember, in Zone 7, the summer heat, the summer sun can be quite a bit more intense than Zone 6. Now, Zone 8 can be considered kind of borderline. It depends on where you're at. You're definitely not going to want to put a Japanese maple in your yard in full sun in Zone 8. It might survive for a number of years, but eventually you'll start having that sunburn issue. You'll lose a limb here and a limb there, and eventually the entire tree will die. Now, Zone 4 and below are considered really too cold for Japanese maples. You might be able to make it work if you can provide the Japanese maple protection in the winter time. The summer times will probably be ideal for them, but the winters are going to be really hard on Japanese maples. So you might want to, if you're going to attempt it, you may want to go with a smaller variety that you can cover with a frost blanket or some type of temporary housing in the wintertime. Now, if you're in Zone 9, you're going to have to remember that this is not really the ideal zone for Japanese maples. This is probably going to be way too hot in the summertime, and you're going to have to plant these in a deep shade area. You're going to have to make sure they get plenty of water and plenty of protection. It's kind of a hit and miss thing there. You might look for a very specific variety that's been bred, and if there is one, I'm sorry, I don't know it. I'd have to do a little bit more research, but there may be a variety out there that can tolerate Zone 9. Hey guys, I just want to say thanks so much for watching, and always remember, you're just going to need to monitor those seedlings carefully. Go back and watch the video and take notes of anything you may have missed or forgotten. But Japanese maples will eventually turn into some really beautiful trees if you're patient. Like I said, it takes a long time for a Japanese maple to become a mature tree. This tree, like I said, is 25 years old. So anyways, I just want to say thanks for watching. I hope you'll like and subscribe and have a great day.